adoption to new technology, to the things that it's been available to them for quite some time. And they pretty much got to use those technology because of necessity, because they wanted really to stay in business, stay connected. And that has a long-term impact on how we do business. But of course, going from in-person to online, whether it's in medical field, whether it's legal, whether it's a business meetings, we didn't have a lot of time in planning, right? It was just happened so quickly. Mm-hmm. We're very fortunate that we have planning, time to plan to go from purely online to a hybrid. So that's really the next thing, how much we're going to plan for that next phase. But also, one thing that has happened in the last 14, 16 months, the experience of these virtual online meetings, independent from what vertical, it has evolved, it has become so better, so powerful, that some of those experiences are not going to be available when you're in person, right? And just the collaboration tools, being able to share, being able to add comments, annotate one another's comment, accessing files, vote, all of that. But there are a lot of great things about in-person experience that could be still very attractive for the next phase of business meetings.
So, still talking about Kudo, JP, another effect that the pandemic had was to help us grow from 1,500 to 11,000 interpreters on our platform. These are vendors who actually work with us. And there's, of course, the happy side to that story, of course, having that kind of growth and being able to depend on such a large network of professional interpreters is great. But the sad part of that story is that those 11,000 interpreters actually went from having, say, sometimes six-figure income every year to zero. Mm-hmm. So interpreters were highly impacted. So, and of course, Kudo is in the interpretation business. So we were fortunate to have been prepared when the pandemic hit, but more so to have been in a position to extend a lifeline to the colleagues that now actually sustain Kudo and pretty much what we do, and to have been able to be there for them when the time came. So
that's great. Well, that sort of leads me into my next question is, and perhaps it's so basic, but yet so important for you, Ewandro. Why is language so intrinsic to business, especially when there are multilingual characters involved?
Well, for many reasons. First off, it's a human right? You have the right to express yourself in your own language. Now, we think language is something that you're born with, right? But it's not. It's a human invention. It's something that props up here and there, depending on the circumstances, depending on your surroundings, depending on the geography around you. This is going to dictate how you refer to colors, how you refer to many things around you. And that goes into feelings and how you do business and how you communicate. And language becomes a very important and intrinsic trait when you want to reach out to anybody. And business is all about reaching out and tapping into other markets and actually talking to people at a level that's really close to their heart. Language is a huge enabler in that case, because without this element, you would never be really sure to be talking to, coming across as you should, but to be talking to the right aspect of that person or community, right? We all have different personas when we speak different languages. Like I'm expressing myself here in English to the best of my abilities, but I'm originally from Brazil. Now, when I jump on a call with somebody from Brazil and we get to speak Portuguese, I'm not just communicating more at ease, but I show a different personality. I show a different side, a different propension to doing business with you, a different, I feel at home on a level that I would never feel if I'm just talking English, right? I have to set my mind to the English mode, to the French mode of speaking and doing business and so on. So language is behind the way we make decisions. It's behind how we think. It's behind everything.
You bring up language, and yet, I feel like there's another the other half of language. There's communication as well, and 80% of communication is, I think, body language, right? Which I feel like in the age of Zoom, in the age of Kudo and the rise of Kudo, is body language. So much of communicating via video, body language is easily picked up. How do you feel like that is overcome or recognized in today's high-tech world? Ewandro?
Well, thank God we have video, like Fardad said, right? Video solves some of these problems, right? Again, when you talk about 80% being body language, it's actually nonverbal, right? There's a lot that goes into intonation, for example. You could be getting this, just the audio of what we're saying, and the intonation would actually convey a lot more meaning than the words that are actually coming out of my mouth. So there's intonation, there are the words. There's a researcher in California, Albert Mehrabian, who actually came up with I guess it's 7:38:55 ratio. 7% being the words, 38% being the intonation, and 55% being body language, right? The fact of the matter is that, again, when you see me, I can point to things and so on, and I can even make adjustments depending on what I know is your perception and your ability to see or not see certain aspects. If I tell you that this is blue, and there's an equivalent word in whatever language I'm communicating through to you, and I use that word, I'm betting on your ability to see this as blue. But if I know that you're colorblind, I'll try to come up with a different strategy that allows you to see it as I know you can. So this is also, again, these are aspects that go into communication. And again, interpreters are very well versed into these things. We tend to think of interpreters as 100% faithful. I say blue, and then you say azul or whatever. But these things automatically creep into the conversation, and it changes the conversation just by virtue of having a mediator there.
Thanks, Ewandro. Here's an additional question for each of you, Sean, Kristen, Fardad. As CEOs of your respective companies, in the age of Zoom and Kudo and other video platforms, in the age of COVID-19, where our days are packed with video calls, I feel like we're staring into our cameras, and our faces and our bodies, communications are scrutinized to a higher degree. As leaders of your companies, how have you had to adjust the way you communicate and your language? How have you had to adjust that to your staffs and to your clients and vendors?
Before you go, guys, I can tell you this. Fardad is standing today. I walked past his office, and he's standing. He has one of those tables that go up and down, and I'm very jealous, actually. So this is one way in which you adapt to how you communicate on video, right? He quickly realized that for this, he needed to be standing, right?
I couldn't tell, but he comports himself quite well, I must say, quite well. But maybe, Sean, we could start off with you.
Sure. It's an interesting topic in a sense of, other than the body language, but I think overall how it impacts your daily life and how you position yourself, from how you dress, from how you really program, if you're a parent, how you would drop off your kids. Do you have to drop the kids off these days or not? Depends on what kind of world you live in. I think what it has done is the whole COVID situation. If it would happen 20 years ago, I can't imagine even how much devastation it would bring with itself. And because we didn't have many of the technologies we have today, and we have the privilege of using them. So to some extent, I think technology saved humanity, because we can all agree this is a global crisis. And every country is somehow dealing with it. And if it happened 20 years ago, I think the effect it would have on the economy of every country, that the effect it would have on the personal, psychological health of every human being, I think it would be immensely different. And I think video platforms like Kudu and Zoom, they played a huge role into mitigating this. But I think as every technology that comes to solve a problem, that's probably how every startup starts, at least how every good startup starts, or the successful startup starts, is to really solve a problem. Later on, it starts getting, wider adoptions, and it goes beyond the original solution that was intended to. And I mean, we all know samples. I'm not going to even really go over the samples, but I think what is done, it has changed habits, things that were not considered polite or were not considered even acceptable, is now becoming normal. And I think this will go beyond COVID. I don't think we'll continue the virtual presence in offices. I believe many businesses, obviously, they can't be virtual. If you're working in a restaurant, you can't be a virtual waitress somewhere. But even the businesses that can do, I believe they will need a physical presence, because humans are social, depends on social physical interactions. I personally, 2 weeks after I had my vaccine, and then my parents had their vaccines probably like a 2 months before that, that was my first time that after over a year, I was able to hug my mom and my dad, right? And I'm like 40 something years old. And you can't imagine how much I missed that. And I never thought before that I literally hugged and I know it was still against the rules here. You still, even if you're vaccinated, you have to have. But I hugged them. Anybody I saw they had vaccine 2 weeks past, I told them, I can't hold on. I really have to hug you. And I missed that. And I think a big part of why these virtual meetings and why these virtual interaction, especially internally in companies, work these days, is because there has been a social, physical trust before the pandemic starts. So it is fantastic that companies like Kudo, it is amazing how fast they grow, and many of the people haven't physically meet each other. But I think at some point when this finishes, hopefully soon, I think it is critical for companies to keep that physical connection to some extent. And but I think the advantage of COVID is that now we meeting virtually, I think even after COVID, is not rude. The fact that if we supposed to meet, and I recommend, instead of I fly to New York and then JP fly to New York and then Christian the same, we suggest, hey guys, how about we just do Zoom, and we're going to save a lot of fuel. We're going to save a lot of time, travel to airports. So instead of having this meeting in New York office, Kudo's New York office, that would literally, the fastest way would kill the entire day. Now it just takes 90 minutes, maybe 10 minutes before that and 10 minutes after that. So I think this is going to be normal. And I think that will change, so many things. And I think that's the part that every company needs to really adapt themselves. And I was talking as a speaker in UN Economic Forum, and that was a very interesting topic that was brought up, and most of the discussion was around this, and that what will happen after the COVID and how things were normal. So I think, answering your question, JP, I think it will definitely change, and I think things that was not normal, was not acceptable, it will become more normal, and people will be much open to virtual meetings and virtual interaction as a substitute to the physical meeting.
One thing too that I think is interesting, it's happened through COVID, is prior to the pandemic, we would have a lot of conference calls, but we weren't always having video on. And I think people just got used to video on. I know as a company, that was our policy, as we communicated with each other. So we could make sure that people were engaged in the conversations, that they were, present, that we were communicating appropriately. And even, with our client base, we just started doing a lot more with camera on. That was typically not as common in the past. It was more call-based, and now all of a sudden, we're seeing each other even though we're not in a live meeting, which, a lot of times meetings on site, so impactful. You're able to gauge, again, behavior, you're able to gauge communication. But this was an interesting kind of middle ground of you're not maybe having that, on-site, in-person ability, but this is getting closer than, it's certainly better than over the phone. And I think one of the things that I found interesting is during this time, as we're all challenged with it, work-life balance was a little bit muddled. Your life was in your work was in your life. You're doing things from your kitchen counter, and you had kids in your background or dogs and whatnot. You got to humanize each other a bit through this. And I saw that even with some of our clients, where you got to know them in a very different way because you're in their living room with them, which was kind of an interesting thing. That was a positive thing in some ways, where we started to get to know each other more as humans, I think, through the pandemic. But I agree with Sean. There's to me a leveling on this. I think certain types of engagements, a call is always going to be okay. Certain engagements, now we're going to be much more apt to using our Zoom so we can engage. Other engagements, we're going to want to be able to work in person. I think that there's a lot of value to being in the office together and being able to, especially ideate and come together as either internally or with our clients. But I certainly think this whole interaction on camera with each other using Zoom or any technology that's out there, I think there's going to be wide utilization of it. It's going to be a lot more applicable and acceptable in scenarios that it wasn't prior to COVID.
Fardad, you're shaking your head. Do you agree with that?
Absolutely. I think when you define CEOs, right, you're really looking at, by default, these fearless leaders that are very ambitious and they really want to lead in a great company and hit all the milestones and all the plans that they have, and make sure we are at where we need to be. So what I want to just say to kind of echo what Kristen mentioned is really leading with empathy and making sure being able to get everybody on a video call at any time. We just not overdo it, right? We respect our team members, our clients. So we have kind of a quarterly all hands with objectives and what we want to do. And guess what? Our Q2 all hands. What's our objective? Reducing meetings by 20%. And that was our objective. And doing that, this would provide more time for everybody to think, to strategize, to go for a walk, to help their spouse in parenting, preparing the food, and so on, right? The other thing is, when it comes to customers, it really be respectful of their time, and let's make sure we end the meetings on time. Let's say we ask for additional time if needed. Let's try to communicate more in writing, have agenda, have more asynchronous communication rather than synchronous communication, right? These are all the things that I think we should be very mindful. Otherwise, we're pretty much overdoing it by taking advantage of the tools that are available. And we're all, ourselves, our partners, our team members, we are pretty much walking on a very fine line, right? Are we? Is it really work, personal? What time am I reaching out? Am I sending an email on a Saturday 10 a.m. where I don't really need a response by Monday, right? Should I just respect the time and put it in my outbox and then hit the send button? So it's we don't add more stress, more sense of the on time, right? That sense of on time is very on these days. So.
Fardad, I have to say that what you just said just made me laugh, because we're dealing with the same thing where, in a way, having these platforms, everyone just schedules time now too, and it's over scheduling, and making sure that you're using it, like you said, even any platform that you're using, you come with an agenda, an objective, a time frame that you're holding to, because it's funny, we have the same objective, 20% reduction of meeting times to organization, because you do have platforms, it's just easier to connect with people. And there is some levels of challenge with that as well.
Well, I know we've skimmed upon technological solutions in different myriad ways and the ways we're using them, but I did want to talk about technology a little bit further. Particularly AI. I feel like we could see AI used further, but we haven't seen it being deployed much yet. Why isn't AI being used more or further for interpretation? Is it a technological issue? Is it a neutrality issue or a legality issue? What, if anything, is holding AI from being further used in terms of interpretation? Maybe Ewandro, if you could weigh in on that front.
Well, I guess part of it is we're all afraid of bomb threats, right? We don't want to get into it too soon because we're already disrupting the market to a level that's very worrisome to most of the vendors out there, to the interpreters, right? Just pushing everybody out of the room. Now everybody has to connect through a computer and so on. Half of the constituents are up in arms. They didn't want it happen on their watch. They were happy with the way things were and so on. Now, but part of it, now being, speaking more seriously, part of it is that the technology is not there yet. Still, we're doing, speech to text, text to text, text to speech. You could actually argue that interpretation, AI interpretation, is feasible today as we speak, but it would be something that's not the same thing as hearing something and immediately going from speech to speech. So that's going to require a lot of investment, a lot of money, and some time. Now, with the amount of information that we have in platforms such as Kudo and others, where you have equivalent bits of speech in, say, Russian, and then on the other side, English and Spanish and Portuguese and whatnot, this is going to be the equivalent of what big data was for translation, where all of a sudden it became, the translation, the machine translation devices started to get more and more apt. We're going to see that happen with speech interpretation as well. Now, to say that we're not using AI is an understatement, because we are. For example, in Kudo, we're now using AI not to replace the interpreters, but to aid the interpreters in better doing their job. Because of the nature of how we now interpret, I'm no longer in a booth where I have a colleague by my side. So I can't just, look over my colleague and with a nod of the head, I know if I'm going in the right direction or not. That person is not making suggestions on a sheet of paper. So AI is replacing that. So Kudo is about to introduce a whole AI assist feature where if I'm interpreting along and I'm overusing a certain word, the machine is going to remind me, hey, you've been saying this too many times. So why don't you say that instead? It's going to help me with the units of measurement conversions. It's going to make suggestions on terminology that I'm probably getting wrong after, listening to the speaker, contrasting with what is in the preparation materials, and so on. And a big part is also just allowing interpreters to prepare faster. So let's say you have 2 days, because this is another thing, right? Lead time is now a lot shorter for the interpreters. They have to jump into a meeting, say, in a few hours from now. So they may not have enough time to prepare. So AI is something we're using now to actually make quick sense of all the materials that are, that have been provided by a client and extract important information, based on the number of repetition words and so on, and trying to, spell it out for the interpreter in a fraction of the time that it would take for them to prepare otherwise. So we're using AI in a way that makes sense. We don't think it's going to replace interpretation anytime soon, but eventually it may.
Eventually. So AI, and to sum things up, AI is a valuable tool to augment and expedite the process for interpreters, but not necessarily to replace them in the short to medium term.
Not yet.
Not yet. Okay.
I just had I had just a quick follow-up to that. I agree wholeheartedly. It's a step-by-step process. It really is. And we've seen that obviously on the translation side where AI has been utilized a lot longer and has been, through neuro machine translation and other MT, traditional platforms. And it's step-by-step. And I think, from my view and from what we're seeing in market with our clients, we look at utilizing those tools in a framework of evaluation of what's the risk. Is it a low, medium, high risk content? And what is the user? Is it a high engagement, low engagement kind of use case? And from them, we apply AI based on that grid work. So an example would be if it's a low risk content and low use, meaning it has to be translated just for maybe they have to provide that content, but there's not going to be a lot of people that actually engage with the content or read it. MTAI is utilized quite often in those cases now, and it should be. It provides an opportunity to be able to have a lot more content to market faster. Whereas if it's low risk, but high readability, then we'll want to use maybe AI with a post editing or another service layered onto it. Where it's high risk, you're going to want to make sure you're having a full translation and utilizing appropriate resources. And the interesting thing about it is I think there's been a fear whenever AI is in a conversation language industry. I think there's a fear of the translator's work is going to go away and the interpreter's work is going to go away. And what we're finding is that there's just so much content that's being consumed globally that it's not a lessening of use within the industry. We're still going to have use for interpreters or translators. It'll just be a little bit different than it used to be. But what we're seeing, there's massive amounts of content that we didn't have 20 years ago, between social media and platforms and how we sell online and other things, where I think that fear has been abated. And I think people are embracing AI a lot more. AI in the interp space is obviously the newest frontier. I think in the translation space, it's been, focused for 10, 15 years. We've been using AI in some case. And it is a bit newer, but I see the same type of modeling of utilizing AI when you can in the right risk setting. Obviously, anything that has a high liability to it or a high risk, you want to ensure that you're having best quality, which is the people business.
Yeah, Kristen, I totally agree. For example, today, as we speak, we could already be using some form of AI to say, interpret the demos that we run every day at Kudo. It's the same terminology, it's the same sequences, the same slide deck, and even the questions that are coming from the audience can be anticipated. So it's easy enough to train a machine to do that.
Right.
Now, it's a different thing to, from there, think that we can go to the UN type of settings where people can quote poetry and they can use irony, and half of what they're saying is an attempt not to say exactly how they feel about a subject. So there's a lot of diplomatic euphemism and so many other figures of speech and so on. So I was more talking about the overall concept of real conference interpreting, which is at the core of what we do.
Oh, yeah.
But I totally agree with you. Depending on how forgiving the setting is, this could already be something that we could resort to. It's like me. I remember once I was able to translate an article in a Finnish newspaper from Finnish into English without knowing one word of Finnish. It was an article about something I had written, and I was interested in seeing what their opinion was. I went to Google Translate, got the gist of it, and because I know this subject, I was able to put it together. Now, if you can do this in a language that at least, again, the benefit of having something that allows you to get the gist of it, like when you go on a Chinese website and you translate it automatically, at least you know what they're talking about with the many mistakes that you will see. This is already something that, again, depending on how forgiving the setting is, could be of immense value. Yes, I agree.
And also, I think one thing in interpret AI that I think is challenging, especially in healthcare, where it's high liability anyway, so it's not a great use case for it, but also is the motive piece behind it. They're emoting differently. It's not as prescriptive. The content isn't. So, again, just supporting what you just said, it's also how prescriptive is the content, how prescriptive is the dialogue to be able to train a machine on both the subject matter and then, the content, will be utilized throughout. But I certainly think, I think we're all in agreement that there's going to be further development and further push of these technologies and solutions in market. And, the market's ready for it. Again, we're just more global every day. And the more we can utilize tools to have that type of interaction where appropriate, I think is wonderful. And we're going in that direction.
And I wanted to add something as well to the discussion. And I think that the artificial intelligence is currently very early in its life cycle. Like it's a couple of years really that is being really worked on, and it is out of just being a concept. And it is right now more focused on a specific vertical. So we use our artificial intelligence to do image processing. So the artificial intelligence is being used on specific tasks. Having said that, when we're talking, and the only company that I know is working on a wider range, basically OpenAI, and I believe Sam Altman is still the CEO there, and they are focusing on OpenAI, which means literally you want to have artificial intelligence, because when we talk about intelligence of anything, intelligence is a result of full spectrum of experience that you gain in life. That's what gives you the intelligence. If you even raise a human and their only job from the day they're born is to just recognize images, they won't do a good job in background removal, for example.
Absolutely.
Because even if right now my job is to interpret something, or is remove a background, or tell you what is this disease from looking at the images. Yesterday I was reading an article about Google just yesterday releasing an AI that would give you suggestion for skin diseases to high accuracy. I think the problem with the AI currently is that is very focused on a specific verticals, and that goes completely against the idea of intelligence. Because if I decide like what part of this image is the background and part of it is the foreground, is not as a result of me repeating this process so many times. It is me as a result of living in a human in a society and understanding trees and understanding walking in nature that has nothing to do with the background removal. But my overall intelligence, my overall experience give me the decision of deciding if this pixel is part of the object or if this pixel is part of the background, which is one of the technology we're using. The reason I brought it up, because we're using AI to do background removal, we're using for image recognition in Glow 3D. So I think we'll definitely get to that point. But I think we still have a relatively far distance, farther than you might imagine. I would say probably it's going to take at least 10 years to 20 years before humans are able to develop intelligence in a sense of multi-experience algorithm that can really repeat what a human goes through when they're analyzing things. In so many instances, we make decisions and we think it is our gut or it is our feeling, it is our heart. But basically, all the gut decisions we make are a combination of unconscious decisions of the experience we had in the past, whether they are good or bad or successful or out of knowledge or just the success or losses we had in life will help us as I don't feel good about this. That's our intelligence, really. That's what we combine unconsciously. We pull out from all those resources, and without really being able to point at any of them, we feel that, well, this is not a right person to hire. This is not a right, decision to make. So I think AI, we would probably have 10 to 20 years, but I think eventually, I'm sure that AI will be able to take over most of the tasks that humans do, and maybe things that require judgment, because that the judgment will connect deep into human abilities. I think those will be the last for the computer to replace them. But everything else, I think we should all not to be naive and get ready for it as CEOs, as somebody who drives a truck or as somebody that is the CEO of a company. We should really have that vision to see where the future goes.
Now, I want to make sure that we open things up to questions from members of the audience. We have people in the audience tuning in from Dallas all the way to Rome. Please feel free to send in your questions, and we'll do our best to get to them in a timely manner. In the meantime, I'll just sort of keep asking more questions. Maybe a question for you, Eduardo. What type of multilingual tech can be employed by startups and the enterprise currently?
Well, I guess before I go there, let me just agree totally with Sean on what he said, and very eloquently. We tend to think of AI as intelligence, right? But it's actually pattern recognition and probability control. That's all it is. When it goes into judgment, then we get lost, as you said, and language is all about judgment, right? Especially translation. It's all about making decisions, and it's all about judgment. Again, I don't think any startup would survive these days without technology, right? Again, from the basic stuff like video connectivity, having connectivity. By the way, Eduardo just asked a question on the chat here that I attempted to answer in writing. Will connectivity even become a human right in the future? Not having connectivity, will that equate to a huge and deep form of exclusion? I believe so. And we already have people working on making sure that that's not the case. So again, a startup would not survive today without connectivity, without technology, and so on. If we're talking about language, there are many things, because every answer brings about new questions, right? So if you solve the issue of interpretation like we have, for example, what do you do about the chat? Right, okay, we're in a meeting like this, and people in Rome would rather ask a question in Italian, have it translated correctly into English, so that I can instead answer in Portuguese and get that across in my own language. So again, we'll need to grow into these kinds of niche solutions as we go. But at the core of it, there will be a lot of translation, a lot of localization tools that we'll have to contemplate as we go. The examples would be too many to name them here without making it boring. But I'll leave it at a very generic level at this point.
Fair enough. Then to switch gears, maybe we can talk about, each of your companies are sort of at different, shall we say, sizes and different stages of the lifespan of a startup. How can companies of different sizes tackle the challenge of multi-language clients? Maybe, Kristen, we can start with you.
You're muted, Kristen. We don't hear you.
Sorry, I think I went out and came back in, so I apologize about that. Could you repeat the question, JP?
No worries. I was basically saying, each of your companies are probably at different stages of the lifespan of a startup. How can companies of different sizes tackle the challenge of multi-language clients?
Yeah, I think I see that a lot with our clients, where we deal with anything from small startups to mid-level to large global enterprises, and at each stage there's a challenge. It's never just like you get to international company and now you've got it down. Like, they each have their own set of challenges. And when I think about startups and I think about kind of that mid-level, for me, it's always ensuring that you have an ROI on where you're going and how you're going to get there. So you're investing in the right thing at the right time and using technologies when you can. When, again, those use cases where it's good enough, using MT, using some of these other technologies so you can deploy quicker. Also, one thing that we've worked a lot with our clients on is ensuring that the content that they're using is structured correctly, so it has a less expensive cost to translating, that is translated more quickly. It can be leveraged in different use cases, so you don't have you don't have to retranslate content a lot and put a lot of costs into that bucket. But it really goes back to, what are you trying to achieve, and what is your strategy, and what's that investment look like? Because it depends on product and vertical and sizing. right? But that you're thoughtful about that and aligning the cost model to it quickly. What we see a lot is translation interpretation is an afterthought. We have a product in market, now we need to do this. We now have a client that we need to serve, so we now need an interpreter. And making sure as you're thinking about going global, the cost of the impact of that, again, not just getting product to market, but then servicing post and ensuring that you have a cost modeling around it, I think is critical.
Fardad, for you, from your perspective, how can companies of different sizes tackle the challenge of multi-language clients?
I definitely make sure to answer this, but I want to just express how excited I am after listening to Sean about 10 to 20 years. I can't wait to have a mini CEO AI version of me that I can help. I'm not giving up. So in regards to different stages, I think it's really about the how much the company is engaged from early on in the whole multilingual and global market. So I think going back again to AI and the large investment within the AI space for translation, including companies such as Google, Microsoft, Facebook. I mean, you'd be surprised that even after 10, 15 years of billions of dollars of investment, they're still relying on translation agencies to really prep them for launching a product in different markets and not their own product. So that tells about, even at that stage of the company, you still need to be fully engaged, even though you have your own tech stack to tackle that, to really understand multilingual aspect and connect truly. So that's, to me, I don't see the challenges are different. It's all really about the scope and the volume and really how integrated the company is within the global user base.
Mm-hmm.
Got it. In terms of looking forward, I mean, how much of your forward-looking strategies have been affected by the pandemic? Can you talk a little bit about that? Maybe Fardad, if you wanted to start us off.
Can you just repeat the question? Sorry, I was just reading the written questions coming.
No, not at all. Not at all. I was talking about forward-looking strategies for your respective companies and how much, if any, if at all, the forward-looking strategies have been impacted by the pandemic. I was wondering if you could talk more about that.
Yeah. What we all have in common as entrepreneurs and CEOs is really how wrong we are in predicting whatever it takes to launch a product, to acquire a customer, to basically we're very optimistic people, right? And always underestimate whatever it takes to get the business from point A to point B. This is a very common thing, specifically for startups. So this was the first time I was proven wrong. The pandemic really put us ahead of our schedules by 2 years. And now, of course, when you are in a very fast-paced, hot space kind of a field, that increases the ambitious and the plans and the things that you want to do, because everybody is paying attention in that area. So there's a lot of smart people, resources that are looking at this space and looking at this. So really being able to constantly create new kind of areas to be ahead. That's something that we need to do to stay relevant for midterm and long term. So that is definitely pandemic empowered us to have the resources to do that, but also at the same time putting us in a spot that delivering these ideas and these promises need to happen very quickly and properly.
Great. Thanks, Fardad. Now we have a question from Imal Gamsharik, who asks, how do you avoid bleeding cash into automated localization of content customers don't need? Is there a need to maximize work not done? Is there anyone on the panel who would like to jump in and answer that question? Whether perhaps Kristen, perhaps Sean?
So we need to maximize work. I'm sorry, I'm trying to understand the question. So how do you avoid bleeding cash into automated L10 of content customers don't use? I guess I'm not clear what the question is. I'm sorry.
I also didn't understand the question.
No worries.
Yeah, sorry.
Well, no worries. Well, Imal, if you're still tuning in, if you want to clarify your question, please do so. We'll be happy to answer it.
JP, I spent some time looking at the question before. Again, yeah. I think it's like for everything else, it's a whole lot of market research, right? It's not just, it doesn't go just for localization that people don't need. It goes for anything else that clients don't need. So the way to address this is to have the right features in place to make sure that you're communicating correctly with your client to the extent needed to actually know what they need. And language is already a big part of that. So the first effort is to have localization geared at allowing you to have that bridge at least in place so that you can already know and gather and compile from the exchange the actual needs of your client. So I'll leave it at that. That's the best I can do with the limited understanding that I have of the question.
Well, one other thing I was going to say is I was wondering if this was in the framework of utilizing technologies to, auto-translate content that's maybe part of websites and that type of thing. And in that case, what we're seeing is there's been a lot of, I think, redesign in the last 5 years of our clients' technical tech decks or tech stacks and technologies that they're utilizing to ensure that they're structuring their content in a way that they're only really working with valuable content. And there's just, I think, been a huge effort with structured content over the last 10, 15 years, but even more so when it comes to localized content over the last 5 that we've been seeing. But making sure it's structured well will certainly eliminate costs of translating content that's not necessary.
Great. Well, if anyone has any other further questions, please feel free to send them in, and we'll just continue chatting. For you, Kristen, could you talk about your forward-looking strategy as we, hopefully, as the globe, reemerges from the pandemic, and how much of it has been impacted by the pandemic, and how much of it hasn't?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it really hasn't changed our strategy so much. It's just accelerated our strategy in certain areas, which, in some cases cause a reprioritization or lowering prioritization of other, strategic areas we were focused on. But it really hasn't changed. Again, we really had to refocus and re-strategize around telehealth, video remote interpreting, those solutions, and make sure we were able to deliver and have extensible technologies that implemented. It also accelerated our strategy around some of the AI technologies that we're creating more around health outcomes and, non-English speakers in the U.S. market. But those were already on our strategy playbook. It was just, maybe accelerating and bringing them in a little bit sooner and funding it sooner.
Got it. For you, Sean, with Glow 3D, as you move forward and reemerge as we all reemerge out of this unprecedented situation, has your forward-looking strategy been impacted in any way?
Yeah, significantly, actually. The way the COVID impacted our business is that many online sellers or e-commerce platform would, before the pandemic, they would see us as probably a nice to have tool, a cool tool that would help them interact. So, and it wasn't necessarily solving the problem. They would using 2D photos and videos that were happy with them, and they had all their projections meet and everything was good. And when the pandemic came in, our technology became a necessity, a differentiative, something to create a difference from their competition, and it became a necessity. So we got calls from many e-commerce platform, even famous ones that we demoed like 6 months before the pandemic, and that was their answers. I mean, it's really cool that you guys do this, but now we don't see any need. And they reached out to us and say, hey, remember you guys did 5 months ago, you guys did a demo. Like, how about let's talk about it. We want to really kind of, invest more in our online, business side of things. And so that's what changed for us. And it was very big. It helped us to go from a startup with having a nice idea to a startup that would solve a problem for a new online world. So to some extent, it helped us quite a bit that everything went online. And we think to a very extensive side, at least on a product side, on an online business, this will be a trend that probably adjusts a little bit, but we think it will be towards upside because many people that would see an offline shopping as a sort of an option, and they were used to it, and they were doing it not necessarily because it was easier to do offline shopping. It was just that they're used to it, right? They were forced to try online shopping, from the grocery store to the products. And once they were forced to do this for almost a year now, I think that establishes new habits. When you ask, like, either force people, but of some sort of reason, you make people repeat something for a very long time, like what we have been all exposed for the past year, it starts to establish habits. And I think these habits will definitely go beyond the COVID. And I think many people will continue shopping online where they did not do that before pandemic. So to that extent, our entire startup, and because we were relatively a small size, our entire startup was sort of changed because of that.
Got it. Now, as we wind things down, many of the people in our audience, you've provided a trove of advice and insights to our audience, but if each one of you could give one last parting piece of advice to the audience, as experienced leaders, as CEOs and executives of your respective companies, for their own respective businesses, I think they would very much appreciate that, in terms of leading and expanding their companies globally. That would be great. Fardad, what sort of parting piece of advice would you offer to the audience in terms of globalizing their business?
It is much easier than you think, right, to start expanding globally. And by trying to really work with people with the expertise. So I would say because of the technology, because of the content, because of the know-how and experiences and lessons learned that are already out there, going global could happen much quicker, much easier, with a lot of ROI, more than what people have imagined before. So my 2 cents for other executives is don't underestimate how valuable this would be for your business, for your success, short term and long term.
Thanks, Fardad. Ewandro, do you have any parting words of advice?
I'm very opinionated, so when you ask me for opinions, I usually have many. But I guess, again, I'll go back to what I know best, which is language, right? and especially a word for the vendors out there, right? Which is a huge subset of our clients, right? Because we have clients out there as clients, and we have our interpreters also as clients. We provide them with platforms with the platform and the Kudu marketplace now, which is a whole new world for them to expand their businesses and so on. I will give them the advice that I always give anybody who approaches me privately: keep an open mind. Keep an open mind because you see a lot of push and pull. You see a lot of bad advice out there, telling people to stand their ground and to wait because this is going to go and so on, and that's not going anywhere. If anything, we're going to go into a hybrid future where what we do and how we've been doing this for now will continue to be a sizable portion of the market and how we do business and how we interpret. If the world eventually comes back to being what it actually was before, you lose nothing by learning a few more tools and a few more strategies that you can apply during the hard times. So I would say hop on Kudu at the earliest possible opportunity, and let's continue to build this future together. But keep an open mind.
Thanks, Ewandro. Kristen, any last parting piece of advice?
Yeah, I think, for me, when I think about going global and other people that are considering it, I think strategizing and creating a plan against our ROI are so critical, but it's only as good as the success of your deliverable and what you're actually able to bring to market. So no one should be locked in to it, meaning that they should frequently assess their strategy and how well it's going against milestones, and be ready to be adaptable, be ready to pivot, be ready to think differently about technology and solutions that may make things easier or may change, the trajectory of your plan. But I think always being ready to be adaptable is critical to be successful and trying to grow global business.
Thanks, Kristen. And Sean, certainly not last but not least, any parting words of advice?
I think the future of technology is very at the very beginning in terms of AI and VR and AR and so many cryptocurrencies and the crypto blockchain technology in general are different parts of I would see it as a body that is moving technology forward. But I think what would probably act more as a brain is AI, artificial intelligence, that is definitely going to impact every business, at least in my opinion. I think regardless of if you're a judge or if you're a truck driver or if you are an architect, I think AI will definitely in future impact any business. And I think at CEOs of companies, as business owners, that you don't have to be a CEO. You could be a truck driver, and you could understand that and think about how AI is going to impact your business, and trying to be forward with that, and trying to be thinking about how it's going to impact your business. Do you have to pivot? Do you have to change that? And I always say, if at the time that the refrigerator was invented, and people used to go to frozen lakes and cut the ice and bring it back, and those companies wouldn't really boycott them, trying to stop refrigeration companies and their technology and trying to somehow damage them. They could become part of it. That's something that I think future will be. So I think AI would be something that it will impact every business. And I think the way it would start impacting would be probably things that are more task oriented would definitely be replaced at the beginning. And then things that are more about requirement of judgment, then those will be probably in the next line. And then at the end, we'll have vision. So in my opinion, AI will never replace vision, at least humanity's vision for things. And that's a good thing for CEOs. The good news for CEOs that I was watching something from Simon Sinek the other day, and it was interesting that he was saying the CEOs should probably change to CVOs because they're chief vision officers, and their main goal is to really see the vision of the organization they are really leading. And I think vision of the future of any organizations or any country or the planet and all is something that I don't think AI will never replace that. But good luck to everyone. Thank you so much for having me this panel, and it was a pleasure to meeting everybody else here.
Thanks so much, Sean. And thank you so much, Fardad, Ewandro, Kristen. I really appreciate all of you being here, and I really loved hearing your perspectives. And I hope all of you who are watching out there took away some valuable learnings. For those who want to revisit moments from today's webinar, a recording will be made available on MultiLingual's website at a later date. Thank you to our fantastic panelists. Thank you to everyone for attending, and thanks for everyone at MultiLingual for making today's conversation possible. Goodbye, and have a lovely day.
Thanks, JP.